also like to start tonight by doing an acknowledgement that we are here meeting on the land of the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation, that this is the land, and always will be, of Aboriginal people. I'd also like to acknowledge traditional owners, past, present and emerging, and be really especially cognizant of the impacts we've had from our floods and our massive climate impacts, and that First Nation people are doubly represented in those impacts, and that it's our role as a community to recognise that and do something about pushing forward for treaty and change. So thank you. I'd just like to say I was very honoured tonight that Sally here, our fabulous author, and it's Blues Fest. What I loved is that it was like people were trying to jump over the fence here just to get into your opening. They weren't on the list. Like, I'm sure I'm on the list. Which shows you how you're a big draw club. Pina Noble will have you on next year. But it is wonderful. I was really flattered to be asked to be the person hosting tonight's conversation with Sally. I met Sally many years ago now, probably 7 or something, something like that, about 7 years ago, in one of the writing workshops that I run, and I was amazed by the stories that Sally was telling. Like, I was going, oh my God, this woman has lived a life. It was extraordinary as she shared, and Sally had this amazing way of sharing a story that made her really unforgettable. She was resolute in the telling, but also had this amazing sensitivity and had this ability to tell you a little bit more than what was comfortable for her. And the telling of a story isn't always about making herself look great, and to me that's what makes a great storyteller. So Sally has had an extraordinary life, and in Not Just the Wife of the General Manager, you will find out about the incredible places that Sally has been, the incredible transformations that she's had as a human being, and the process that has got Sally from where she was out in the middle of this amazing country, you know, sort of very much a woman pioneering on her own in a very much a man's world, you know, to here, you know, from working on Kiri Packer's farm to out there door knocking for me with the greens. That's a big jump. And I tell you what, Sally is a woman capable of very big jumps, which makes it's such a fantastic read. So I'd love to start tonight with our questions. I'd like to start about what pushed you through, because I say to a lot of people, I remember saying to you, you really need to write a book, but most people don't. But you did. So what kicked you off from the musings and the idea into this actual hard copy?
Well, in 2013, I think it was, when I first moved to Byron Bay, a Jillaroo who had been working for us on Newcastle Waters knocked on my door. And she'd been working in 1976, in fact. She was married, she had a little child. She knocks on the door, and she was a special Jillaroo at the time. We were great mates. And I didn't know she was in Byron. She tracked me down, she knocked on the door, she came in with a little child on her hip, and she had this reference, handwritten reference, in the days when one wrote references, and it said, "To whom it may concern." And I had written a reference that said, this is to say that Fliss Rose had done a wonderful job, she was a good Jillaroo, and I'd highly recommend her to be employed in the future. And she had the original still, and she put it down on the counter in front of me, and she said, "Look who signed it." And it was signed Sally Warriner, the wife of the general manager. And she said, "What the fuck were you thinking?" That's when I decided to write a book.
So what does it actually mean, like, to actually sign that? And I can't imagine you ever not being, you know, you have by nature, you're a fiercely independent, strong-minded woman. What did it mean to be the wife of a general manager? What was that?
Multitasking, flexibility, ability to cope, just giving everything a go. And I need to say that I'm in no way unique. Every bush woman I know, and I know lots of bush women, I've spent 30 years in the bush, and they're all the same. It's an ability to cope, I think. It was a little different for me in that it was a huge company, and when Kerry Packer bought the company and we started developing this massive pastoral company on the back of his golden checkbook, things got really big and the company developed. So my job role got bigger and meaner, and I had all these kids, and it was just plain busy, I think. So I had a different role from the GM. I didn't have anything to do with the development of the cattle, and a lot of bush women do, particularly on the private places. But in the corporate industry, the women the men really do the cattle work and the property development, and the women have a different role. But my role was varied, and I was busy.
She was very busy. And interestingly, in the beginning of the book, Sally talks about, and I was interested in the way you made a massive jump. Like, you were living the full hippie life, living in London in sandals and driving your car across, the several continents, not all the continents because you would fall in the water, but, many borders. And then you arrive back in Australia and you fall into like pastoral life. Yeah. Like, how did this bohemian hippie girl become, I guess, in love with a country life, which sometimes is much more rigid in its expectations of who a woman is and what her role is, and how did that impact on you?
Well, I'd been backpacking around the world really for 4.5 years, and my sister and her husband lived in Broome, and that had 2 children in my absence. I had a boyfriend at the time with whom I was travelling, and we landed back in Perth, and we decided to hitch up the West Australian coast to go and visit my sister and her children before we went back to the East Coast to sort out our lives. So we hitchhiked in a cattle truck with a truckie who dropped us off at the turn off to the Broome races. So I had plaits and a headband and beads and a hippie dress and Jesus sandals, and he had a singlet and a sarong and Jesus sandals and an earring which I had done when I was stoned one day in London. It was a bit off centre, and his long hair in a ponytail and a beard. We didn't look like anyone else at the Broome races, including my sister, who had on a picture hat with frangipanis all around the edge of it, cool mint-sized pearls, a cotton dress cinched at the waist and strappy sandals. And she's leaning up against the bar with about 7 cowboys, one of whom was my future husband. And they all had on Cuban heel boots, R.M. Williams pants, variations of striped shirts, and without exception, dun-coloured Stetsons with horsehair bags. All of them. And they're all leaning on the bar, and the GM turned to my sister, because he was a good friend of hers, and he said, "Would you have a look at what the cat dragged in?" And she said, "Oh my God, that's my sister." So it wasn't love at first sight.
It wasn't love at first sight, but when was it love, Sally? Like, this was a big change, and did you have to, like, in changing for that relationship, did you have to give up the sandals?
Yeah, I had to put on a pair of riding boots. Sandals didn't cut it anymore. Yes, I changed my whole life. And I can't really, I just loved the Kimberley, and I still do. It's still my soul country. I could not believe how utterly beautiful the Kimberley was, and how much I loved being on horseback, and how much I loved being out there mustering. And the GM was, only he was just the M at the time. He was mustering in a Cessna 150, and we'd go out all day mustering cattle in riverbeds, and it was magical, absolutely magical. So I fell in love with him, and I fell in love with the Kimberley, and I'm still in love with the Kimberley.
You're so diplomatic. I'll come on to sort of other aspects of writing soon, but I wanted to ask you, there's an incident in the book where there's a dinner party, and it might have been when you just, I think, was it Newcastle Waters or just before, where you had, I think, a South African accountant.
Yeah, that was Brunette Downs.
Oh, that was Brunette Downs. Brunette Downs, what an interesting name for a farm. But tell me about that. Brunette Downs, I'm going soon over to, to blonde plains. A less popular property. I think the men were naming it. White men. These aren't
Aboriginal white men.
Yeah, this was an Aboriginal land. It was Aboriginal land, but not Aboriginal names. But you have this major conflict, right? And there's this fabulous story where Sally loses her shit. Big time. Can you tell us a little bit of that story? Because that's a cracker.
Okay, so where there's about 10 people at the table, it's just before Christmas. The accountant was a Afrikaner, and he got pissed, and most people were pissed by about, after dinner. I was a bit as well, or I wouldn't have made such a bloody rookie escape that I did. Anyway, he started talking about how Africa was going to implode, and it couldn't be run by the blackfellas. It was a tinderbox, and it was going to implode. And I, full of righteous indignation for someone who really knew very little about it all, started to have an argument with him, which was possibly unwise, with a pissed Afrikaner with a steak knife, who then held it to my brother. My brother was at the table, and at the time, he's now more right than Genghis Khan, but at that time he was more left than Mao, so we were the only two lefties at the table. And so he threatened my brother. Nobody stood up for me. So I got the shits, took off in this shooting brake, which was like a sawn-off shooting vehicle that the King Ranch hierarchy used. I took off at night, at 8 o'clock at night, flat out of there, towards Corella Creek. Well, it had rained. I got about 10 kilometres down the road and got bogged to the gills. There was no way. I had no water, no mosquito net, no mosquito spray, no radio, because it was before the day, and I was fucked out there for the night without any way that I could be rescued, because there were no tracks. No one could have come looking for me. So I learnt. Next time I lost my shit and I took off, I made sure I had a mosquito, at least a radio. Anyway, the next morning, very uncomfortable night it was, needless to say. The next morning I can hear, and he's flying over looking for me. So I've given him the finger from the road. He sent someone out to pick me up, but I didn't make that mistake a second time. I made a lot of mistakes, but not that one a second time.
So what was one of your biggest mistakes that you made, Sally, that you look back on and think, I wish I could have done that differently? Is that hard? I should have told you about that question before. You can answer it if you like. You got it? Otherwise, if you can't, you just go pass.
Pass.
Okay.
I'll think of it and then I'll do it.
She'll think of it and she goes, oh, that one.
That's really terrible not to know what I should have done better.
Well,
There's
most
about
of
a
us
million
know,
things.
because you know why? Most of us have lived our life without insight.
Including me.
You've written a book, you've got heaps of insight. We all do. Most of us don't even. I threw you in the deep end then, Sal. I'll just dig myself out. I'm in the mud now, in that sort of situation. Don't worry about what you can change. You'll come up with it at the end.
I will.
Some of those classic mistakes. I guess in that sense is, what I loved about that story. It's very difficult to be that person who speaks up against, I guess, the shared values. In a more traditional, and very often I grew up in the country as well, not as outback as that, but very often you're speaking up against
A lot.
long, very colonial ideas, and to be that lone voice, and as a woman doing that, How did you with no support? That's the key thing. No support. How did you maintain the strength of character to keep that fire going and not have it snuffed out and be one of those broken women that just go, yes, okay, whatever? Because that's what you've done. You've got firier, not less.
Yeah. Yeah, I have, but there was no way out of that. You just had to keep going. I had a big job, I had a big family, and I felt that I could do it. I felt that I wasn't going to lie down. I wasn't going to give up until, for years and years, I just was going to keep going. I was going to be all things to all people, work as hard as I possibly could, and prove to myself and other people that I was strong and I would survive it.
Right, and you did. So it's very difficult writing, not difficult, it's complex when you write a book about your life, because as we know, all our lives touch very deeply on the lives of our family and other people that sometimes don't see it in the same way. And I'm interested in the book, you refer to your husband as the GM. We never get a name. Was that something you decided to do to keep some sort of anonymous quality in the book, or was that to create this sense of division?
Everybody knew who he was. It was not necessary actually to mention his name, or everyone in the bush that I knew who he was. And it was just, yes, it was a division. He was the general manager and I was the wife of, and therefore the theme through the book, I wanted to continue that theme. I was the wife and he was the GM until I wasn't.
And so did he like the book? Sally, has he got back to you and said, awesome? He'll be putting out his book called Not Just the General Manager of the Wife.
I need to say here I have two sons of mine down the front and a daughter-in-law, and they're the younger sons. The older sons are elsewhere. One's in Darwin and one's in the bush. But it's very nice to have them here, and it was very difficult writing a memoir and being truthful without offending anyone. And I hope that I've done that. I didn't want. My intention was not to offend anyone, and I did run quite a bit past all the kids before I actually published. First of all, I wanted to check that everything was correct with regard to all the plane crashes and all the emergencies and all the injuries and all the disasters that happened continuously. I wanted to make sure that I had dates, times and incidences correct, because I didn't want to be accused of getting anything wrong. So they were helpful, but I was also a big saver of scribbles, and I have basically saved everything for, I don't know, years and years. I had old faxes that I wrote the kids from overseas trips in the early 80s. I wrote them faxes home, and I've still got the greasy paper faxes that I copied for the book. So I do think it was, it's truthful. There's things obviously that I didn't say for various reasons, but I think I said the most of what I should have said, I hope, without offending anyone. Much.
But you can't write like that, can you? Like, you can't, when you're writing, if you write solely for the purpose of pleasing others, you lose your story. You have to be brave, and you have to push on. What was the hardest story for you to write, to be honest about in this book? What told the most about who Sally Warriner is, that you may not have shared with people as easily? I'm never interested in what's right with people. I'm interested in what's wrong with them. That's what makes politics a good place. There's a lot wrong with them. Anyway, in one class, I really remember you shared this story of, and it's in the book, so that's why I'm telling it, of you lost it as a mum. You lost it.
Oh yeah, poor Tom.
And is that you, Tom?
That's Tom.
Tom. You know this story, Tom, right? And I know, because you've milked it your whole life.
It's his party story.
Is it? Yeah. But Sally talks about how you got the shits with him because he wouldn't eat his peas, and she backhands him like we all want to, right? And
Get arrested today.
he goes flying, and he falls on the floor, and he's still complaining, so you drag him off to his room.
Screaming.
Finds out that he's got a broken arm, right? He's got the green stick fracture, which is not as bad as broken. Don't gasp, you've all done it. Look at them all pretending. All pretending they've never given their own kid a green stick. But what I loved in that class is that you were so raw in the way you spoke about this. It was such an honest confession of what it felt like as a parent to lose it, and at the risk of not making yourself look like the perfect mother. Like, that's a big risk. And I thought, that's when I went, wow, that woman is really interesting. Like, that's a big risk. In sharing those stories, that what I'm asking is, are you aware of the risk you're taking when you share those stories? That it doesn't always make you look great, but it's your honest. It's a human honesty.
Yeah, but they're really good stories. I mean, everyone's going to want to read them.
I know. So how did he use the...
Well, his arms, all right, put your arm up, Tom. But I do remember we're 400 kilometres south of Catherine. And I was home, Ken was away, and I knew he had a green stick, and I plastered it. I had a little back slab I put on it, but I thought, I've got to get an X-ray just in case it's more than that and it's been displaced. So I left at 6 o'clock at night, and I drove for 4 hours to Catherine to go to the emergency department. I had rung the doctor there beforehand, because I was always ringing the doctor at various hospitals because there was always someone sick. So I rang him and I said, look, I'm on my way. I think that Tom is 3. I think I've got a child with a green stick. I just want it looked at. And he said, yeah, that's fine. Just call into emergency. So at midnight, I call into Catherine Hospital emergency, and the guy on call says, yeah, it's a green stick, but we'll run it through the X-ray if you want us to. I said, yes, please. So X-ray, yes, it was fine. He put a different plaster, a bigger plaster on it, and sent us off home. And as I was walking out, I said to him, Doctor, do you think that break looks like a mother completely lost her shit and backhanded her kid, and he fell off the stool onto the floor, and that's how it happened, and then dragged him the full length of the veranda? Or do you think what happened was that the stool fell over and broke his arm? And he said, definitely the stool.
You okay, Tom?
We got to hospital at midnight, but you broke at about 8 a.m.
Tom, that's him, not just the son of the wife of the general manager. He'll have to write his book. I guess we can't, in talking about your time on Newcastle waters, and I guess we all want to know, what was Kerry Packer actually like?
Well, he only came to Newcastle waters 4 times in the 18 years that we were running it for him. And at those times, we always went on some sort of exciting safari somewhere. So he sort of brought up caribous and helicopters and jet rangers and enough ammunition to blow out Timor and, camping equipment. It was glamping, it wasn't really camping. And I had to organise all of those trips. So that was fun. That was really good fun. And we did do some fantastic trips out to this Torres Strait and into the Kakadu shooting stuff. And in the days when you could shoot stuff, and it was really, really wild safaris that we went on. So I only had we both did. He really, when he decided to buy Newcastle waters from us, he had come to visit us when he had a minor heart attack. He was actually related to one of our partners. My husband and I and 2 partners bought Newcastle waters in 1981. He came along in 1983 when interest rates were 17% and we had this massive debt, and he stayed the night. And at that time we were living in an old stone house which had really thick Pise stone house outside Dunny, no screens on the windows. It was the wet season. He was staying in Vicky's, one of my kids' rooms, and he got the shits. It was hot, there was no fan, there was no air conditioning, so he dragged his mattress out underneath the rain tree. So all the people at work all the jackaroos and everyone had to go work past this sleeping mound of a man who was underneath the rain tree with the sheet over his head because the bugs were dropping out. So he said at the time, fortuitously, look, it was about building the homestead. Yeah, later on he said, look, the only thing missing from that house of yours is the fucking bars on the window. When I buy this place, we're going to build a decent homestead. So that's what happened.
Right.
My relationship with him was always good. I also did all the organising for all of his New Year's Eve parties for about 12 years. We went down and I dressed him up in charades and how to solve a murder, and really it was extraordinary what I actually got him to do. But he and I have nothing bad to say about our relationship with him over the years. He was a very good boss, and it was on his golden checkbook that we built the third biggest pastoral company in the country. And so that's how I found him. I mean, there's the odd tantrum involved, obviously.
Yeah.
But I can't say anything that hasn't been written.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I can.
You
But
can,
I mean, it's all been written before. I mean, I've seen him throw phones and, spit the dummy. But, he's a man. Of course he does.
So, Sally, in all of this, in this extraordinary life full of amazing adventures, and anyone who's been Australia is an extraordinary country. Once you head into, it's hard not to be moved by the landscape. It's hard and beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But what was it that made you leave? When did you know, or what was it that led to the end of that brought you here?
I didn't come directly here. It was via Brisbane and a whole lot of volunteer work overseas. So I didn't come here for 12 years. But when I think the final trigger, would have been in 1976. We had a journalist who came, and we were always, it was a packer place, and it was the jewel in the crown. So we had a lot of journalists there a lot of the time, and there was a lot written about us and the property and the bush in general. And this journalist came, I actually knew him socially, and he came and stayed in the house for 4 days and stayed in the guest wing, and I cooked and cleaned and had kids running back and forth and running the outfit that I was running from the kitchen and the office. I honestly thought that maybe he might have noticed or wanted to interview me about what I was doing. He was writing a coffee table book about the 10 major cattle properties in Australia, and we were just one of those. So he stayed for 4 days, and I looked after him, and I didn't get an interview, and I didn't ask for one, and he left. I used to edit a lot of the GM's correspondence because I could write better than he could, and he was very happy to have me double check anything that he wrote from a business point of view. So when we had right of edit because he was packer, and when the article for the coffee table book arrived, Ken put it on my desk for the okay. So I read through it, and it was 4.5 foolscap glowing pages about what a fabulous manager and what a good bloke and how important he was and what a wonderful cattleman. And then I got 3 lines that said, Ken's attractive wife Sally spends her time in the homestead, looking after her children, entertaining and running a large garden. So that was it. That was the 4 lines that I got. So I walked into Ken's study when he came home that night. I put it on his desk and I said, if that's published, I'm suing for defamation. So it did go out, and I didn't sue for defamation, but I walked 4 years later.
Can you tell me then, not just the wife of the general manager, what you actually did do from your nursing? Like, tell us a little bit about all the things. You told us a little bit before, but it's very far-reaching from
nursing.
Well, from this, you were often the only person out there with the medical knowledge to stitch up heads, get people,
Yeah.
sort of medicine to. So what was the one day? What looked like in your life when you were there with the kids?
There was never a one day. It was always every day was different. But medical emergencies were all the time, and I was the nurse that was running the clinic. We had an Indigenous population of a couple of hundred at times coming and going from Brunette Downs, and then also Newcastle Waters at Mullinger. So there was a lot of, and I ran a clinic for the Aboriginal population, plus looked after all the staff. And they were always falling off the horses and splitting open their heads, and they all got Baku rot and bull rash and all of that. And so I was busy. I was busy nursing as well as mothering. So I can't really say that there was a day, but I guess my nursing responsibilities were I was always there. I was always called upon. I was on call 24 hours a day, and there were always fights. People were always splitting their heads open with nullas. They were kids falling off horses, broken bones. I had a doctor that I could ring all the time. But I was it. I was Robinson Crusoe, and I never thought twice about it, because lots of women run the black box on stations. Lots of women. I don't know any bush woman who doesn't, and most of them aren't registered nurses. And so they have in the early days they had a black box which had numbers written on it, so that they might call in and say, this is, the temperature's such, and this is what they've got. And the doctor will say, well, put number 30, take 5 of number 35. Because it was all labelled in those days, and it was all organised by the flying doctor. I didn't need that because I was a registered nurse and I could really dispense myself. And I also had, pain-killing drugs and whatever, because I was registered. But I don't want to sound like I was the only one to do it, because there were so many women out there, so many unsung women who did so much work for the whole time that I was out there. But we had some serious accidents. I mean, these kids crashed 8 planes, for example. I mean, really. Why would you put up with that?
I know, it's a bit different, isn't it, into reversing into the garage door. It's an extraordinary life, and when you say really often, there's lots of other women that did the same thing, but I imagine lots of other women were in the same position that you were in. There's lots of other women whose extraordinary roles and lives went unrecognised and uncelebrated, and so this feels, your book is a fabulous way to celebrate this very extraordinary life that you've lived. You haven't finished living it, that chapter of your life, or a couple of chapters. So before we go to the book signing, I'd love you to tell us what you, Sally, are proudest of.
My family, without doubt. Everybody is, I guess, it's the same. I'm really proud that I, even though my marriage split up and that was very sad, that I have maintained a fantastic relationship with the 2 older boys, the stepsons, and all of their children and their wives, and my sons are, just really good blokes, good people, very kind and generous to me. And I have to say that the difference in the parenting of my boys and what I not endured, but the way it was in those days is simply extraordinary. These blokes do half of everything, probably 60%, eh, Shah?
As it should be.
Yeah, and the whole ethos of parenting is a shared job now, and I think it's fantastic. And I didn't teach. I don't think I taught my boys that, any of them, the stepsons or my birth sons. I think their wives did. And I think it's the strong women coming along who say, hey, wait a minute, let's do this together. And my proudest achievement is my sons.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think having your family here, having so much of your community here too, is testament to your ability to pull a crowd. She can pull a crowd. She can pull a root and she can pull a crowd. That's in the book too. I'm not going to
But
tell.
they have to read
You have to read it. Sorry, boys, it's always uncomfortable. She's a very beautiful, striking woman, even when she strikes you off the bench. So I would encourage you all to get a copy of Sally's book. It's a great read. It's beautifully written, and it just really takes you to that place. That was so, I've spent quite a bit of time out west, not as much as you, obviously, but I know the feeling of standing in that country, and it's so evocative. It does. It's different, isn't it? So I would encourage you all to. This is how it goes, right? You buy a book, and then you come to Sally, and she signs it for you. That's what you do at the book launch, which would be really great, because we love that. But I would love you to celebrate. Because what Sally's done, lots of people talk about, I'm going to write my story, I'm going to do this, I'm going to write my story. And most people never do. It's just an idea. It takes extraordinary discipline. And like Sally, lucky she was a nurse, and she sort of keeps journals and notes. Be aware of that if you're a friend or family member. You are being documented. But she's been gathering these incredible resources over years, and it reminds you of how important it is to journal, and how important it is to believe in your story and to follow that through, and what it takes to get that, to pull it together into a book that is on all the kind of, at the airport. It's right up there. I saw it the other day when I was coming through. Yes, that's right.
The airport.
She's sitting above Bob Hawke. Well, he would have loved that. Not just the wife of Bob Hawke. Not Blanche's book. So put your hands together and give a huge round of applause. Yay! Look at that, yay!
I'd just like to say that here we have Mandy Nolan, the next member for Richmond, and I've been...
Thanks, Al.
Yeah, and anyone in the room who wants to get a sledgehammer and some tomato steaks on Saturday or Sunday and put Mandy's face up all over the place, we have got to have somebody down there in that cesspool watching the back of all those people who are doing nothing about climate change or anything that's really important. We have little children that we have to consider. And unless we have people like Mandy who are fighting to do something about the climate and all the issues that Mandy's standing for, just get Mandy into Richmond. She's going to make Jackie Lambie look positively quiet and reserved.
Sally is a rabble-rouser, and you've got to love that. You must have loved it growing up. Sure. Yeah, they do, yeah. I think it is. It's great. There's nothing better than sons of strong women. Isn't that true? Because they're not scared, but they know how to shut up and do what they're told. So do please, once again, hand for Sally and her fabulous book. Here we go. You've seen it beside us. Not just the wife of the general manager. Read it, and when you read it, write that you've read it, put it on your social media feed and say, this is my friend Sally's book. I reckon really is. Push it forward. It's great to encourage other people to read literature as well, and particularly memoirs like this one. It's a great story. Thank you, Sally.